What you need to know for sure is that you cannot anger a person who is developing in the military sphere. It can turn out very badly. But I had a different situation. My loved one betrayed me, and I felt very weak and depressed, and most importantly, I did not know what to do next. Willie Brennan, an Irishman and my closest friend, hails from Connemara, where his father was once a fisherman. At the age of 2, Willie's parents decided to move to America to join his uncle in Louisiana. Initially, they lived in a mobile home for 3 years while his father worked on a shrimp boat alongside his uncle. By the time Willie turned 9, his father owned 2 shrimp boats, and they moved into a comfortable house just 3 doors down from mine. That's when Willie and I became inseparable, navigating through middle school, high school, and college together. After graduating, I pursued ROTC and immediately entered the U.S. Army. Meanwhile, Willie traveled back to Connemara to visit relatives, a place his family regularly returned to over the years. He ended up spending a year there with his grandmother. My first assignment after receiving my commission was BOLC, Basic Officer Leadership Course, aimed at honing fundamental leadership skills. It was a bit more rigorous than what I experienced in ROTC, but overall it wasn't too challenging. Afterwards, I was assigned to Casteau, Belgium, and SHAPE, Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, NATO's military arm, for 3 years, where I served as the most junior and inexperienced officer in the headquarters. Every NATO member nation sent their finest representatives there, as they represented their countries on a global stage. I felt incredibly fortunate, though I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had made a mistake in sending me there. 3 months into my assignment, Willie asked if I could pop over to Connemara for the weekend. We hadn't seen each other since graduation, so I agreed. While arranging transportation, I realized that, contrary to my lifelong belief, Connemara wasn't a city, but a region. To reach there, I would fly into Limerick, where Willie would pick me up and drive me to his grandmother's house in Clifton. The journey took a little over 2 hours, passing through Galway Bay and the city of Galway, where we stopped to eat and drink. Drinking with Willie was something I had done quite a bit. We had our first taste of alcohol at the age of 13. We raided my parents' bar, got incredibly drunk, and ended up terribly sick and severely punished. After that, we steered clear of alcohol for a long time. Years later, we found ourselves in a pub in Galway, Ireland, catching up on the past few months. He shared that his grandmother was doing well and pleased to have him by her side. She was keen for him to stay and had even introduced him to some local girls. He had always taken pride in his Irish roots, but watching him in that setting, it felt like he had found his true home. His grandmother was remarkable. Even in her old age, she must have been quite the beauty in her youth. Some people age gracefully while others don't, but Katie Brennan belonged to the former category. She could easily pass as Willie's mother. She was very active socially and highly popular, too. Most of her time was spent playing matchmaker. Lisdoonvarna, a couple of hours away from Clifton, hosted Ireland's biggest matchmaking festival. Katie had started a smaller version in Clifton, aiming to surpass Lisdoonvarna's fame. Her first words to me were, "So you're the troublemaker who always tried to lead my Willie astray." I'm not sure what he had told her, but I immediately liked her. That marked the beginning of an enjoyable 2-day stretch. I met the girl determined to see Willie settle in Ireland and marry. Her name was Sophie, and both she and Willie understood Katie Brennan's desires very well. However, Willie had no plans to stay in Ireland, and Sophie was set on staying. Despite this, they liked each other and were a couple. Sophie, born and raised in Clifton, knew many people. She invited some of them to join us at their favorite pub. I'd like to say that the Irish women were open-hearted, but that wasn't the case, and I didn't make much effort. Americans sometimes have a mixed reputation abroad, as I had learned early in BOLC, Basic Officer Leadership Course. We were taught to be exemplary wherever we were stationed, respecting local laws and avoiding anything that could embarrass ourselves or the United States. So I endeavored to be a respectful guest. At one point that first evening, I offered to buy a round of drinks for our group. But I was promptly told that I was their guest, "I always knew," said Willie, "that the Irish are generous and kind people, until you cross them. Then you're in trouble unless they decide to forgive you." Throughout that evening and the following day, I stayed close to one of Sophie's friends, Maeve. She embodied the quintessential Irish image: long, thick red hair, fair complexion, and a wit that kept us all entertained. When I returned to Shape, she visited Katie's house to bid me farewell. She took my phone, entered her address and phone number into my contacts, and I reciprocated. Afterward, she kissed me on the cheek and left. During the 2 evenings I spent there, individuals or couples would discreetly leave our small group, while new faces would join. Willie mentioned on the first evening that the Irish had a habit of quietly slipping away from social gatherings without making a fuss about goodbyes. This tradition apparently started with someone getting drunk and sneaking off to avoid embarrassment, but it became a popular way of departing gatherings known as the Irish goodbye, or the French exit. Maeve and I started texting and talking regularly. Over the next 3 months, I spent several weekends either in Clifton or Limerick with her. For 6 months, Maeve and I saw each other whenever one of us could travel to visit the other. At Shape, I enjoyed my work and the international atmosphere. My desk was in an office with officers from Turkey, Italy, Great Britain, and Denmark. The Danish officer, Captain Irene, pronounced Irina, from Copenhagen, embodied what one might envision as pure, unadulterated beauty from Denmark. She got along well with everyone in the office and visitors, except me. It seemed that everything I did was perceived negatively by her. After a couple of weeks, our communication dwindled. She focused on her tasks, and I focused on mine. Initially, I pondered what I might have done to distance her, but couldn't pinpoint anything. I hadn't been rude or disrespectful. I treated her with courtesy. Unlike others who fawned over her, I maintained a professional demeanor. Observing her work and listening to her, I realized she was witty and intelligent, efficient in her job. She earned respect for her skills and admiration for her appearance. Clearly, she harbored no fondness for me, a sentiment that became evident. Colleagues even remarked that she seemed notably indifferent toward me. Our roles involved managing position papers, navigating the international headquarters approval process across various countries, a challenging yet rewarding task. After those initial weeks, I decided to disengage. She kept to her world and I to mine, both mentally and physically. We ceased our morning greetings and evening goodbyes. Despite this, others in the office maintained cordiality, respect, and appreciation for the mutual support we offered. Maeve visited one weekend, and we were at my favorite bar just outside the back gate of the Shape headquarters compound. We leisurely enjoyed charcuterie and wine when Irene entered with another Danish officer. We deliberately avoided each other. Maeve and I departed after another hour or so and went to my quarters where we spent the night. Willie's grandmother thought Maeve and I would marry, but we didn't. We were together for 9 months and cherished our time, but eventually grew apart. Willie remained in Ireland but was eager to return home, though reluctant to leave Sophie. Katie opposed his departure, but he was determined to pursue his own path. Sophie, however, decided that if he was going back, she would accompany him. I served as his best man at their wedding in Clifton. Maeve attended with her date and introduced us. I, too, was ready to return home. So I did. I took a 2-week leave and flew back. Within a week, I was eager to return to Belgium. Back at work, the Turkish officer was being reassigned and returning to Turkey after completing his 3-year assignment. A large group of his friends and colleagues gathered in the bar near the back gate for a farewell gathering. The bar was crowded. We bought him drinks and he distributed boxes of Turkish Delight, a delicious gelled candy from Turkey. Living and working in an international environment was a fantastic experience. My co-workers welcomed me into their homes, where I met their families and enjoyed their cuisine. Hardly a week passed without receiving an invitation somewhere. I resided in the BOQ, Bachelor Officers' Quarters, in my own room. Irene also lived there, but she was located at the opposite end of the building and 2 floors down, so our paths rarely crossed. There was a communal kitchen available, but I usually opted to dine at either the officers' club or the cafeteria in the headquarters building. The BOQ kitchen often emitted various smells, some pleasant, some not, and occasionally downright unpleasant. The primary store in the small shopping center on base was a food store named Bon Marché, roughly translating to the good market or good deal. It was a fantastic place offering a diverse range of products from all NATO countries. At a farewell party for my Turkish colleagues, I had to leave early due to an early morning meeting, employing what's known as an Irish goodbye. The following day began with an early meeting that stretched almost to lunchtime. I returned to my office just in time to secure my meeting notes in the safe before heading to the cafeteria for lunch. As I collected my lunch, I unexpectedly encountered Irene walking by with another unfamiliar female officer. To my surprise, she stopped. "Your predecessor never left a party early," she remarked sarcastically. Out of habit, I stood to respond. Perhaps my predecessor didn't have an early meeting the next day. And perhaps he was better prepared for his meetings. I looked at her, smiled, and replied as pleasantly as I could. "Enjoy your lunch, Captain Bungard." Then I sat down. I didn't watch them leave, although I'd often admired her departing figure regardless of my personal sentiments toward her. My personal feelings towards her? What did they entail exactly? I couldn't quite pinpoint it. I didn't dislike her, nor did I hate her. But at the same time, she hadn't given me a chance to like her either, so I wasn't sure how I felt. I was probably still the most junior officer from any nation at Shape. I didn't think about it much, sometimes smiling at the thought that I might have been sent there by mistake, and some poor clerk in Washington at the Personnel Center was likely in trouble for sending me. As my first year neared its end, apart from Maeve, I had dated women from Italy, Great Britain, Greece, Portugal, and the U.S. I began receiving looks and comments from other BOQ residents about my numerous dates and diverse array of companions. Even the 3 Italian officers, known as Casanovas, dubbed me farfallone, which I later learned meant womanizer or philanderer. I took it as a compliment coming from them. Living in such an international community had its perks. The BOQ was a melting pot for single officers, both male and female, with representatives from 9 different countries. It was a truly unique environment. The whole community seemed to embrace each other's holidays. American Halloween was particularly popular among the children, and my married friends living on the base enjoyed seeing kids from around the world in creative costumes ringing their doorbells for candy. The entire community also joined in the celebration of Germany's Oktoberfest, one of the most beloved and lively holidays. Thanksgiving. Not quite the same. The global community didn't quite connect with the significance of that particular holiday. Christmas, on the other hand, was universally celebrated. I considered going home for the holidays, but opted instead for a weekend with a German naval officer who also lived in the BOQ. She and I traveled to Nuremberg for the Christkindlesmarkt, a festive Christmas market in the heart of Nuremberg's Old Town. It was a blend of stalls, lights, food, and adventure, all creating a wonderful atmosphere. The British knew how to stage a grand ceremony with much pomp and circumstance, but the Germans knew how to throw a party. We enjoyed ourselves over a weekend in Nuremberg just before Christmas. I decided against traveling during the busy holiday period and stayed at Shape, which mostly shut down for several days before Christmas Day. However, each office needed someone present every day except Christmas. Our division chief devised a schedule by drawing days of the week and names from separate hats. Tuesday was my day, and Thursday was Irene's. Friday was Christmas, and an officer from England never had his name drawn, so he had the whole week off. This arrangement meant that we only had to work on our assigned day that week. I overheard Irene telling others that she wished she could go home, but working on Thursday made it impractical. I hesitated to trade with her because I didn't want her to feel indebted to me, although she wouldn't have. Moreover, if I worked all week, it would allow some of the others to spend the entire week in their home countries without having to stay back for work on their scheduled day. I entered the office of the division chief. I'm not going anywhere for the holiday. Why not give the rest of the office the whole week off? It will be quiet around here, and I believe I can handle anything that arises. Are you certain? Yes, sir. Just one condition. What's that? Don't disclose that I volunteered. Just say it's taken care of. Are you sure? He asked again. Yes, sir. That was Friday. Shortly before the end of the business day, he emerged and announced, "There's been a change. I've reviewed next week's schedule. Most of the key staff will be away, and there are no urgent deadlines. So all of you take the week off and enjoy time with your families. Merry Christmas." Cheers erupted, and suddenly a bottle of champagne and glasses appeared from somewhere. We all had a toast, exchanged holiday pleasantries, and prepared to depart. Irene hugged everyone, even wished me Merry Christmas. I reciprocated, and they all left. The boss came out. "It's too early to regret it," he remarked, "and everyone's gone, so you can't change your mind." I grinned. "I won't regret it, sir. I'll savor the peace and quiet." He placed his hat on my desk and settled into the corner. "What's the deal with you and Bundgaard?" "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. She's the sweetest, most laid-back person until you're around. Then something changes. It's not that she gets mean, but she definitely tenses up." "Why's that?" I shrugged. "I have no clue. We've hardly exchanged a dozen words since I started here. Something's up. Just between us, right after you arrived, she asked to be transferred back to Denmark. They postponed it as long as possible, but they've found her replacement. She'll be gone by mid-January. Like I said, I don't know." "Fair enough. She's good at her job. Hate to see her go." The following Tuesday, I was alone in the office. A Danish officer walked in and grinned. "Looks like it's your turn to be on duty," I snapped to attention. "Yes, sir." "What day does Captain Bundgaard work?" "She doesn't, sir. She's off all week." "All week?" "Yes, sir." "Is everyone off the entire week?" "Yes, sir." "And when are you off?" "Friday, sir." It happened to be Christmas Day. As he began to leave, I started to sit, but he turned to look at me. I promptly stood back up. After scanning me from head to toe, he departed. It was shortly after lunch on Thursday. I was going through a small pile of action papers on my desk, making sure I hadn't overlooked anything, when someone confidently walked into the office. I glanced up to see a German four-star admiral approaching my desk. "Merry Christmas, Lieutenant," he greeted, extending his hand for a handshake as I snapped to attention. "Why don't you close up and head home?" "That's a great idea, sir. With your permission, I'll do just that." "Excellent. Go ahead." And just like that, he disappeared. I followed him out and observed as he made his way down the hall, stopping by each office to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. At SHAPE, there were 3 four-star flag officers: the Chasseur, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, an American; the D Chasseur, Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe, British; and the COS, Chief of Staff, a German admiral. I had met them all and attended meetings with each one, so I recognized the COS. They were highly esteemed in their respective countries and globally renowned. Christmas Day fell on Friday, and I spent it at the BOQ with others who had chosen to remain. The weekend passed quietly until Sunday evening, when everyone began returning. I kept reminding myself of the stark differences between Europe and America. From where I was in Belgium, you could drive to Rome, Italy, in just 15 hours, passing through parts of Germany, France, and Switzerland along the way. To put that in perspective, it takes around 13 hours to drive across Texas on Interstate 10. Many people stationed at SHAPE could frequently return home to their respective countries. Monday morning arrived with everyone eager and happy to be back at work, because what we were doing was genuinely exciting. The morning was mostly spent with each person sharing stories from their holidays. When it came to my turn, I didn't have much to contribute. I called my mother and my best friend. I found out his wife is expecting a baby. That's about it for me. Didn't you go with Kristen? Asked Tommy, the British captain. Kristen was the German naval officer I had dated for a while and had gone to Nuremberg with. As Tommy asked, I noticed Irene turning away from us. No, she needed to be with her family. This prompted a conversation about customs and traditions, although Irene didn't participate. She stood silently by the window until someone directed a question her way. She excused herself and left the room. This led to another discussion, initiated by an Italian colleague asking me about my holiday romances and sparking a debate on my dating life at Shape, and the reputation I was apparently gaining as a ladies' man. When Irene returned, business resumed as usual. New Year's Eve arrived with parties galore. Everyone was celebrating. I received invitations to 7 parties and accepted 2. I attended the first, but never made it to the second. The first party was hosted by our division chief, an obligatory event I couldn't skip. There were around 30 people at their rented chateau, complete with a moat. Alongside our colleagues and their spouses, family and friends were also invited. I recognized many from work, including one I had dated who was now with someone else, so I kept my distance. I danced with 3 others and greeted all my workmates. I even caught sight of Irene with an older couple. I chatted briefly with my boss and his wife before they circulated among guests, while I continued mingling. It was a lively party, and I enjoyed interacting with such a diverse group. Around 11:20, as everyone prepared to ring in the new year, the older man I had seen with Irene earlier approached me. Speaking broken English, he apologized. "Please forgive my words. I am not good with your language. Sometimes it doesn't make sense for me." After hesitating, he continued, "But I try to tell you, she is right. I see how you make her sad." He paused again, then said firmly, "Don't hurt my Irene anymore." Irene suddenly appeared, took his arm gently, spoke to him in Danish, and led him away. As they walked off, he turned back and seemed to say, "Gavek." I felt a hand on my shoulder. What happened with him? Tommy, my British co-worker, inquired. "Nothing, I don't know him at all." "I do. That's Irene's dad, and I think he just asked you to leave." "Leave? From where? Why?" "No idea, mate. I'm grabbing a drink and finding my wife. She gives great kisses at midnight." He chuckled as he strolled off. I didn't make it to midnight. If Irene's dad saw me again, he might have asked me to leave in a more embarrassing way. He seemed quite drunk already, and I didn't want to risk his reaction, so I quietly slipped away. New Year's and Christmas were both on Friday. I didn't return to work until Monday. I was the first one there. The boss followed soon after. I thanked him for inviting me and told him how much I enjoyed the party. He was German, so we discussed how much fun it was with such a diverse group of people. Irene was the last to arrive in the office, as usual, greeting everyone but me on her way to her desk. The boss called her into his office, and after a brief meeting, they emerged. He gathered us together and announced, "Irene is being transferred. She will leave in 2 weeks once her replacement arrives. Until then, it's business as usual. Additionally, Captain Donati will be returning to Italy by the end of the month, with his replacement arriving next week. There are many changes happening quickly, but our mission remains our focus. Let's get back to work." As I returned to my desk and began working, I couldn't help but notice Irene walking past. Watching her, I reflected that I would miss the sight, though certainly not her attitude toward me. That week seemed even tougher than usual. It felt like she was intentionally emphasizing her dislike for me. Previously, she had simply ignored me, but now she went out of her way to display her disdain. On several occasions, she would engage in conversations with others while sitting on the corner of my desk with her back turned. I knew from experience that rudeness is one thing, but blatant disrespect crosses a line in any culture. We all had inboxes and outboxes on our desks for incoming and outgoing documents, correspondence, reports, projects, etc. I said, pushing my inbox against her when she sat on my desk. She kept talking but stood up. She was speaking to Tommy, the Brit. He glanced at me over her shoulder. Our eyes met, and he rolled his eyes, almost smiling. The next day I received a call. "Lieutenant Parker, may I help you? I'm Captain Annika Nielsen from the travel office. Could we grab coffee? I have something to discuss." "The travel office? What would we need to discuss? I haven't done any shape travel." "Please, Lieutenant, meet me in the cafeteria at 10. "How will I recognize you?" "Don't worry. I'll recognize you." She approached as soon as I arrived. "Lieutenant Parker." It was a statement, not a question. "May I call you Philip?" "Phil, please." "Good. I'm Annika. Shall we get coffee?" "What's this about?" "Coffee first." We got our coffee, found a table, and stared at each other for a few seconds. Well, she stared at me until I felt uneasy. "Captain Nielsen," I began. "Annika, please." "Annika." "Do you know the word doppelganger?" she asked. "I do." "I didn't until recently. By recently, I mean this past month. My husband and I arrived in early December. Within days, we met Irene Bundgaard at a Danish gathering at the Officers' Club. We instantly connected, like sisters. Since then, we've talked about a lot of things, even some personal ones. She gave me this. She handed me a photograph. I examined it closely, just as Annika had done to me earlier. It felt like looking into a mirror. The face I saw was unmistakably mine. If I had an identical twin, we couldn't have looked more alike. Who is this?" I asked. "It's Irene's fiancé. He canceled their wedding and broke up with her right before she came here," Annika explained. "Well, that explains a lot," I muttered. Actually, it explained everything. Annika continued, "Irene couldn't believe it when she first saw you. She instantly disliked you because you reminded her so much of him." She pointed at the photograph. "Even some of your mannerisms, things you do without thinking, are like his. Did you know you spin pencils with your fingers when you're talking on the phone?" "Yeah, I'm aware of that," I replied. "So does Frederick, her ex-fiancé. She knows a lot about you and you have no idea how much your presence here has affected her. At first, she thought she could ignore it and move on, but it's only gotten worse. Despite loving it here at Shape, she's asked to leave because of you." Annika paused, taking a sip of her coffee. "She feels guilty about how she's treated you, but she can't help it. She harbors a lot of resentment towards him, and unfortunately, it's spilled over onto you." "Why hasn't she spoken up?" "She was planning to, but as time passed, it became harder for her." "Do you see that?" "Yes." "Then it got worse because she was angry at herself for not speaking up. Then she became angry at you just for being yourself, which isn't fair for her to think. You must understand that none of this is your fault. It's hers. Oh, trust me, I know it's not my fault. You need to support her." "What?" "You need to help her not feel so terrible. If she leaves, she'll feel bad forever." "Why should I? She's treated me poorly for a year and never considered my feelings." "And why are you getting involved? Did she send you?" "She didn't send me and wouldn't, ever. But she's my friend." "You've only known her for a month. How much of a friendship can you develop in a month?" "Friendship grows quickly when there's sadness. Irene is sad. Sad for you because of how she treated you, but angry at herself for doing it." "Fine. Let her stay angry. I have no intention of helping her. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to work." I stood and left. Irene was walking down the hall towards me as I reached the office door. Usually, I would gesture for her or anyone else to enter first, but this time I didn't. I opened the door and stepped ahead of her. I was angry that I might be expected to soothe her feelings when I was the one who had been mistreated. The day was dragging on slowly, and I sat at my desk reviewing some papers that wouldn't be needed for days. Occasionally, I glanced in her direction, and a few times I thought I caught her looking at me. Screw it. I called Kristen to see if she wanted to have dinner, but she was unavailable. The whole office got involved in a discussion, so I was distracted until it was time to leave. Later, at the BOQ, I emailed Willie and recounted my day. He responded almost immediately, laughing. He knew about Irene, of course, and teased me about having feelings for her. I kept telling him to go to hell. Dinner in Europe is typically eaten later than in America, but I had adjusted to it. It was nearly 8 o'clock when I sat down to order at the officers' club that evening. I had just been handed the menu when she approached my table. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I do mind. I'd rather not dine with someone who's treated me like I'm invisible. Go make someone else happy with your lousy attitude." With that, I simply stared at her. She stood there for a few moments, then spoke. "You're right, of course. I wanted to apologize. You remind me of someone I don't like, and you didn't deserve to be treated that way. I'm sorry." And just like that, she vanished. On the day she departed, she came to the office to bid farewell. She embraced everyone, engaging in the European cheek-kissing ritual except for me. As colleagues gathered around her, expressing how much they valued working with her and how greatly she would be missed, I remained seated at my desk, feigning concentration on my work. Once she had finished with them, she stood before my desk, placed a flower in front of me, and departed. The office fell silent, all eyes on me. Tommy, the Brit, approached. "Do you know what that is?" he asked. I looked up at him. "I have no idea." "It's a lily of the valley. Among other things, people give them to seek forgiveness. I know because I've given them to my wife more than once." I picked it up and breathed in its fragrance. The following year flew by quickly. Kristen and I became a couple until her assignment ended, and she returned to Germany. Well, not exactly Germany, but aboard a German ship. After spending time in Clifton with Grandma Katie, Willie, Sophie, their son Philip, named after me, and I toured Europe for 2 weeks. It was early spring, and I was nearing the end of my time at Shape. Annika Nielsen and I had kept in touch loosely and had coffee a few times. One day she called me. "Just wanted to let you know that Irene will be here on Monday. She's part of a planning group meeting and will be staying for a week. She asked about you. When I mentioned you're still here, she wondered if you'd like to have coffee with her." I paused for a moment, recalling the lily of the valley. "Please tell her yes." "I'll relay that to her." 2 hours later, Annika called back. "They're arriving Monday morning and their first meeting is at 1 p.m. How about coffee at 11? "That works perfectly." Our initial meeting was a bit awkward. We both struggled to find things to say, leaving long stretches of silence. By noon, however, things had lightened up and we were even smiling at each other. Just as she started telling me about her fiancé breaking up with her, she realized she had to leave. Back at my office, Irene's replacement had recently arrived, a male captain who had less seniority than me at Shape. Despite my longer tenure, he outranked me, as did most others there, all of whom were captains or majors. I was a first lieutenant, having recently been promoted. At the end of the workday, I headed to the BOQ for my usual rest before dinner. As I ordered at the club, Irene walked in, spotted me, and approached. This time, I stood up. "We're having a welcome reception in one of the small rooms, but it'll be wrapping up soon. Would you like to join me for a drink afterward?" she asked. Yes, I would. That evening, she shared with me the same story about her fiancé that Annika Nielsen had told me earlier. "I was so angry and upset, and I treated you terribly. I can never apologize enough," she said. "My behavior was unacceptable, and I embarrassed myself." During her week there, we spent all her free time together. It was enjoyable except for the last evening before she returned to Denmark. "Philip, this week has been fun, and I still regret the time I wasted when I was stationed here. But you need to know something." "Okay, what is it?" "I'm sure you're wondering if I think about my ex-fiancé when I'm with you. I wonder about it myself, and honestly, I don't know." I don't think so. But you remind me so much of him. And I fell in love with him and the qualities he had that I'm not sure. You and he could be twins in so many ways. I had actually considered that possibility. I didn't want to simply replace him, but I knew I'd never be certain. There might always be lingering doubts. However, it didn't matter much because it seemed likely that week would be the last time I'd see her, as I would be returning to the United States in a few months. When we said goodbye, she gave me a customary kiss on the cheek and a sincere farewell. After completing my 3-year assignment, I returned to the U.S. I took a 30-day leave before starting work at the Pentagon, where I held the same position as I did in Belgium. Once again, I found myself as the lowest-ranking person in the office, and once again, I thought it must be a mistake. My boss even contacted personnel to check, but it was confirmed there was no error. He looked at me and said, "Lieutenant Parker, it seems someone has marked you for the fast track. First shape and now here. I advise you to keep your record clean, work hard, and begin pursuing your master's degree soon. It appears you're on a promising path. Command experience is all that's left." And indeed, my career advanced swiftly. I moved from one office to another, then decided to rent a house. I furnished it with everything needed, finally enjoying the space after years of living in a single room in temporary military quarters. I worked late, but I usually had days off to relax. After 3 months, I felt the need to communicate. I often visited the officers' club, but the opportunities were limited. Eventually, I started a casual relationship. We devoted Saturday nights to each other. This arrangement worked successfully for almost a year, until my friend from the German Navy called me. She came to Boston with her training sailing vessel for the Tall Ships event and asked if we could meet. We met, greeted each other, had dinner, and spent as much time in bed together as her 3-day visit allowed. 6 more months passed. I was excelling at work, and Willie, Sophie, my namesake Philip, and I were all doing well. Despite the distance, we managed to visit each other every couple of months, and Willie remained my closest friend. My casual partner and I still enjoyed our Saturday nights, and life was good. Then, Willie called with news. They were heading back to Ireland because his grandmother was ailing and wanted to see him. Since things were slow for me, I decided to take a 2-week leave and join him. On a whim, I reached out to my former colleagues at SHAPE to see if anyone I knew was still there. 2 were. I asked if they could contact the Danish Army Liaison Office to get Irene's contact information. I left my own details just in case they couldn't provide hers. 2 days later, I received a call at my office. It was her. The Danish liaison had reached out and passed on my Pentagon number. When I picked up the phone and heard her voice, I was pleasantly surprised. "I wasn't sure if you would remember me," I admitted. She chuckled. "Of course I remember you. I've tried to get your number from your office at SHAPE several times, but they wouldn't give it to me." We caught up on our lives, with no mention of significant others. I mentioned my upcoming trip to Ireland for 2 weeks. "Could you come to Denmark? I'd love to see you." We discussed it and decided to meet in Copenhagen. After spending 2 days with Willie and his family in Clifton, I flew to Copenhagen with the intention of staying for 2 days, but ended up staying a week. When I saw her at the airport, she hadn't changed physically, and there was a happiness in her that I hadn't seen before. It's funny how much I've thought about you, Philip, really. Not that other guy who resembles you. We paused, simply gazing at each other. "Do you remember when I first started seeing you differently?" "I don't know." "It was during Christmas week when you volunteered to work so others could be off. I heard you did it because you found out I wouldn't be home for Christmas if you didn't." "That wasn't the only reason." "I remember other moments too." "Like?" "Like the party where my father spoke with you. I went home for Christmas and they came with me for New Year's. I told them about you, and when I pointed you out at the party, my father, a bit tipsy, decided he needed to talk to you and convince you to leave so I wouldn't have to see you. I apologize for that too." I chuckled. "It's okay. He was just looking out for your well-being. As I mentioned earlier, my original plan was to stay for just 2 days, but we were having such a great time that I ended up staying a whole week. On my final night there, we became intimate. I wish I could say it was the best experience of my life, but it wasn't. We both tried too hard and it felt rushed. We both knew we'd had better experiences before. Luckily, we had more chances to improve things. Over the next nearly 2 years, we alternated flying across the Atlantic to see each other. My time at the Pentagon came to an end, and I received orders to move to Germany. I sold my house, packed up, and left. By then, I had been promoted to captain, and my new assignment was at USAREER, United States Army Europe headquarters. When I received my orders, I remembered the advice from my boss at the Pentagon about needing command experience. And now I was getting it. I became the garrison commander, a position typically held by a major. Things were looking promising. The job was fulfilling, Irene was back at shape, and we spent most weekends together. Our relationship was becoming serious, and I didn't mind the journey to shape, whether it was a 5-hour drive or a 4-hour train ride. After nearly a year of this routine, Irene secured a position as the Danish Army liaison to headquarters USAREER, and we decided to rent an apartment together. Marriage was on our minds when my branch office contacted me. They informed me that since my 3 years in Heidelberg were nearly complete, I was needed in Afghanistan. So Irene and I made love, kissed, had a tearful farewell, and I left. A month later, I found myself back in Germany at the military hospital, although I had no awareness of it at the time because I was in a coma. When I finally regained consciousness, Irene was sitting beside my bed, holding my hand. She filled me in on how I had ended up there. 6 of us had been in a vehicle when it was struck. 4 of them died almost instantly. The driver and I survived, but just barely. They had considered amputating my left leg below the knee, but were swayed by the fervent objections in all 4 languages Irene spoke, convincing them to hold off and let me decide. After being informed of my options, I chose to keep my leg despite the prospect of it being heavily scarred and disfigured, and knowing I would walk with a limp for the rest of my life. Irene smiled as I conveyed my decision to the team of doctors. Taking my hand, she declared, "He may dance with a limp, but he can't dance with only one leg." It surprised me, as we hadn't danced together more than a dozen times. I looked at her. She leaned in and whispered, "I have plans for us to dance together for a long time." Then, she kissed me. I spent another month in rehabilitation. Irene was there for every physical therapy session, providing encouragement and support whenever I needed it. I was originally scheduled to return to the continental United States for further hospitalization, rehabilitation, and an evaluation to determine if my injury would force me to leave the Army. It took some time, but I eventually convinced them to allow me to remain in Germany for rehabilitation and evaluation. After 3 months and successfully passing the Army's annual physical training test, the board approved my continuation of active duty. I received a new assignment at USAREER headquarters. 2 months later, Willie stood beside me as my best man when Irene and I got married in Copenhagen. In his limited English, her father expressed relief that I hadn't gone away. We spent 2 years in Germany and wanted more time together. But Irene had to return to Denmark for 2 years due to obligations. There were no job prospects for me there, so I returned to the United States. After 3 months apart, I flew to Copenhagen to surprise her with a visit. Although I dislike surprises, I decided to knock on her apartment door. To my dismay, a man opened it. With my basic knowledge of Danish, I understood "ah, good" as "oh my God." For 30 seconds, we stood staring at each other, both unsure of what to say. Finally, I asked, "Where is Irene?" Attempting to enter, he blocked my path. "Hun or her ich. She isn't here. Vor er hun. Where is she?" Despite his efforts to stop me and his mixed Danish-English speech, I was determined to find Irene and speak to her. Spotting the open bedroom door, I headed towards it. but he reached it first, closed it, and stood guard. I recognized it as the bedroom door from when she had moved in. We heard movement in the room, and he glanced back as if trying to peer through the closed door. Reacting swiftly, I pushed him aside, opened the door, and entered just in time to catch sight of the bathroom door closing with a metallic click of the lock. I knocked on the door. "Irene, Irene, come out!" No answer. "Irene, you have 10 seconds to come out and talk to me." I began counting. The man continued to babble, but I paid him no attention. By the time I reached 10, she still hadn't responded, so I turned and headed for the front door. I grabbed the carry-on bag I had dropped when the door opened, and I saw the man. An hour later, I was at the airport. The same plane I had arrived on had been cleaned and serviced, preparing for its return flight. I had spent less than 3 hours in Copenhagen. There was only a business-class seat left, but I didn't mind. I handed over my credit card to the ticket agent, received my boarding pass, breezed through immigration where they stamped my passport without much scrutiny, and headed straight to my gate. 15 minutes later, I was boarding the plane when my phone rang. It was Irene. I ignored it. I let myself into my apartment, went straight to my bedroom, and collapsed onto the bed. Exhausted from crossing the Atlantic twice and discovering my wife's infidelity since my last sleep, I fell asleep immediately. I woke up still dressed, even my shoes. After undressing, I relieved myself, shaved, and showered. Things I hadn't done since before my brief trip to Denmark. My phone had a dozen messages from Irene. I deleted all of them unread. 3 months earlier, upon my return to the United States, I found myself back at the Pentagon in the same position I had held previously. Apart from a brief command role in Germany, it seemed that being an action officer was my niche in the Army. I had been pursuing my master's degree part-time and had about a year left to complete it. The morning after returning from Denmark, I surprised my colleagues by showing up at the office. Anticipating questions, I made a general announcement and recounted what had transpired. I received condolences from everyone before we all got down to work. I immersed myself in my tasks, perhaps trying to compensate for I'm not sure what exactly, but I needed the distraction. 2 days later, as I stepped out of the elevator in my building and turned towards my apartment, I was suddenly bombarded with Danish. Roughly translated, I was accused of being ungrateful and uncaring, someone who lacked faith in his wife and refused to give her a chance to explain herself. The only part I understood clearly was the barrage of insults directed at me, calling me a worthless, despicable person. She continued to curse me in other languages she knew, leaving both me and the dozen other neighbors peeking out of their apartment doors, utterly clueless about her tirade. Finally calming down, she threw her passport at me. It hit me before falling to the floor. "And now, you," she said in English. "Look at that." I picked up the passport as she approached, snatched it from my hands, and swiftly flipped through it until she found the pages she wanted. She thrust it back at me, pointing to a stamp. "What do you see?" Anyone familiar with travel knows that immigration stamps passports upon entry and exit from a country. I saw a stamp indicating she had entered Great Britain 3 days before I arrived in Copenhagen. She made sure I noticed, then seized the passport again, flipping to another page and pointing to another stamp. "And now, what do you see?" This stamp showed she had left Great Britain just the day before. Once more, she took the passport, turned to the most recent page, and shoved it back at me. It clearly showed she had entered the United States that same day. "So, rend mig dit rov hul," she exclaimed angrily in Danish, meaning, "Go to hell, you idiot. I'm going home and I never want to see you again." She returned to my apartment, grabbed the suitcase and backpack from the hallway near the door, and stormed past me towards the elevator. I tried desperately to get her to stop and talk to me, but she ignored my pleas. Even as we waited for the elevator, I continued to beg her to communicate with me, but she remained silent. When the elevator arrived and the doors opened, she stepped halfway in, dropped her bags, and stood in the doorway, preventing me from entering. I attempted to step over the bags, but she pushed me back just as the doors closed. I hurried down the 5 flights of stairs, but by the time I reached the bottom, she had disappeared. Now, what should I do? I wondered. She had certainly made her point clear. If she wasn't in her apartment and was instead in England, then who was in her apartment and why? I called her multiple times, leaving apologetic messages each time, and begged her to talk to me, but received no response. I called Willie and explained the situation. He suggested that European women, like his wife Sophie, might react differently than American women when mistreated or misunderstood. He warned me not to underestimate Irene's resolve, especially after she flew from England just to prove me wrong. He advised me to wait quietly and see what happens next. Perhaps she would eventually calm down and forgive me. He pointed out that my biggest mistake, like many men, was jumping to conclusions without giving her a chance to explain. A serious error, possibly with serious consequences. I'm considering pursuing her. You might want to be cautious. The situation is still fresh in her mind, and your approach could potentially backfire. It might be better to give her some time to think about it. But she might not like me waiting. Maybe she'd prefer if I acted immediately. She might, or she might not. It's a gamble. Good luck either way. You know I'll be here to help you through whatever happens. And I knew he would. He'd been there for most of my life. A month passed, with no word. I figured if she was going to file for divorce, she'd do it in Copenhagen, where we got married. Then I remembered something. It took me 3 days, but I managed to arrange for a single lily of the valley to be delivered to her apartment in Copenhagen. A week passed, then another and another, without a call from Irene. Despite my attempts to reach her by phone, there was no answer or response. I decided to visit the JAG, Judge Advocate General Office, where military attorneys provide legal counsel. While they couldn't represent me in a divorce, I hoped they could offer some advice. The major I spoke with informed me that because we were married in Denmark, any legal action regarding separation or divorce would have to originate from there. Since Irene continued to ignore my calls, I resorted to sending her an email expressing my acceptance of whatever decision she made, emphasizing my need for clarity. 2 additional weeks passed with no reply. The 3rd week brought unexpected mail. Amidst the usual advertisements was a notice of separation and divorce petition. The original was in Danish, accompanied by a translated version and a handwritten note from Irene. Philip, after much consideration, I've come to believe our marriage was a mistake. You didn't even try to find out the truth about who was in my apartment. You just assumed it was him, and that hurt me deeply. Please sign the papers so we can move on. Irene. I realized then that our shared lily of the valley had lost its significance. I signed the documents and returned them promptly. Soon after, I was summoned to my boss's office. Captain Parker, General Thompson is being promoted to 3 stars and is being sent to Italy. He needs a new aide. He's observed your performance and would like to discuss the position with you. What are your thoughts on that? I'm not sure what to think or say. You could express disinterest. To be honest, I'm not sure that I am. In that case, he wants to meet with you tomorrow morning at 9. Make sure your uniform is clean. He grinned as he said this. It was his customary remark whenever one of us had a one-on-one with a general officer. The meeting went well, and a month later I was en route to Italy as the aide-de-camp to newly promoted Lieutenant General William G. Thompson. I was also promoted to Major. This promotion came as a surprise. Captains as junior, as I rarely moved up to Major, unless of course a 3-star general had a hand in it. Generals' aides have little social life outside their duties accompanying the general, often alongside the general's wife, to numerous mandatory functions. 4 months into our stay in Italy, I hadn't had a single day free except Sundays from general-related tasks. The military is a small world, and with time, familiar faces tend to reappear. In Italy, I encountered 2 officers I knew from shape, General Thompson was having lunch with dignitaries in a private area of the officers' club, while I dined in the main room nearby. The two officers entered, spotted me, sat down, and we shared a meal together. We reminisced about our days at Shape and inquired about mutual acquaintances. "You remember that attractive Danish captain who worked in your office? She's back there now, but as a major and married to an American named Parker." "The lucky guy," remarked one of them. They exchanged glances. "Holy shit, that's not you, is it?" I nodded. "Wait, you're married to her?" asked the first officer. "I was, but we're divorced." "Well, well, well," he responded. After a brief pause, he continued, "Just out of curiosity, is she really as attractive as she seemed?" "Come on, Tony," said the second officer. "Is that the kind of question to ask about his ex-wife?" "He just said they're divorced, so why not?" Tony retorted. They debated the point back and forth with no resolution. Finally, Tony turned to me. "So, Phil, are you going to answer?" I chuckled. "Sure. Imagine the most attractive woman possible, and I can bet Irene is even hotter." "Damn it, then why did you divorce her?" I explained the reasons. "When did you last see her?" "About 8 months ago." "Does she know you're here?" "Probably not. Last time we met, I was at the Pentagon." "Then next week will be a surprise for her." "Why's that?" "She's part of the team coming here to brief the staff for 3 days." "What team?" "The advance team for the NATO exercise in 3 months." "That briefing isn't on General Thompson's schedule," I noted. "It's just for the planners. He'll get briefed when everything's set." We ate in silence for a while. My mind was racing with thoughts. Should I try to see her? We finished lunch just as I was told the general was ready to leave. I stepped outside to check his car and driver, then returned as he bid his farewells. Back at the office, I asked the executive officer if he knew anything about the briefing. "We just got wind of it. They sent a memo just to inform him it's happening. I thought about suggesting he meet the briefing team for appearances' sake. It's always good PR." "Do you have a list of the team members?" "Yeah, right here." "Can I take a look?" "Sure, but why the sudden interest?" "My ex-wife might be on it." "Uh-oh, that sounds complicated," he said, handing me the roster. Her name, Major Irene Parker, was the second on the list as the deputy team leader. I returned the list. "Thank you. Are you planning to see her?" "There's no need, so probably not." "Should I notify the general?" "Nah, just inform me if he decides to meet them. Then I'll inform him." The briefing team arrived on Monday to meet with General Thompson's planning staff at 2 o'clock. At 2:15, General Thompson planned to drop by to greet them. His executive informed me about one crucial detail. I approached the general and handed him the team roster. "I should mention that one of the team members you're meeting this afternoon is my ex-wife," I said. He glanced at the list. "I assume it's the one named Parker?" His grin revealed a mischievous side I hadn't fully appreciated yet. "First question, are you two on good terms?" "I don't think so. We haven't spoken in months." "That's probably normal." Next question, is she competent at her job? "She was when we worked together." I proceeded to explain my history with her over the next few minutes. "Well then, care to join me at the meeting?" he asked with a grin. "Some people are impressed if you work for a 3-star, maybe she will be." I chuckled. "I doubt it, but I'll hold the door for you." Exactly at 2:15, I opened the conference room door. The gatekeeper snapped to attention and bellowed, "Attention!" The general entered with me, following closely behind. I positioned myself near the door while he walked to the head of the table. His staff occupied one side, with the briefing team on the other. Taking his seat at the head, he gestured for everyone else to sit, all complying except Irene, who hesitated briefly as she glanced at me. Throughout the general's few minutes of speaking, I noticed from the corner of my eye that her gaze returned to me. After concluding his remarks, the general requested the briefers to introduce themselves. Each stood in turn, providing their name, rank, nationality, and role on the team. When it came to Irene's turn, she stood, offered her details, and promptly resumed her seat. At this point, the general remarked, Major Parker, I hear you're familiar with my aide. Also, Major Parker. Irene stood again. Yes, sir. We know each other. She sat down swiftly afterward. After bidding everyone success and expressing anticipation for their report, the general rose to depart. As he stood, the others followed suit. The door opened and the general strode out, with me trailing behind him. In the hallway, he turned to me. You certainly have a good eye, Phil. She's quite attractive. Yes, sir? She is. I just wish I could have a second chance with her. In that case, perhaps now is the time to gauge her feelings. I'm not sure, sir. She seemed pretty upset the last time we met. My usual routine involved driving to his house each morning in my car. His chauffeur would meet us there and take us to the office. In the evening, the chauffeur would drive us back home, park the car, and I'd receive any instructions needed for the next day. Then I would drive myself home. Things changed on evenings when he had social commitments, which occurred at least 3 times a week. I always kept extra clothes, including formal attire, at the house in case plans shifted unexpectedly. On a particular evening, the general and I chatted briefly before I left for the officers' club and dinner. In the lobby, there was a schedule of events posted. At the top was a reception for the visiting shape team. As I turned to leave, I considered having hot dogs in my room instead. The event schedule was right by the front door, so I had only taken a couple of steps inside before I decided to leave. That's when I heard my name. Phil. In that moment, as I turned around, I replayed everything in my mind. It all stemmed from a serious misjudgment on my part, and I accepted full responsibility. I could even understand her reluctance to accept my apology. I turned, and there she stood. Hello, Irene. Already leaving? You just arrived. Yeah, I saw you were busy with a reception, so I thought I'd better not intrude. Not even to say hello? I just did. I was hesitant to say more, afraid my feelings would show. We locked eyes. I wanted to plead for forgiveness. As for her, I had no clue what she might be thinking or if she wanted to say anything at all. Before either of us could speak, one of her colleagues spotted her and ushered her back to the reception. I left and headed home, deciding to skip dinner altogether. After that, we had no further contact. She and her team finished their business and returned to shape. On Friday, after they departed, I received a package from her via NATO courier. Inside was an envelope from the office that had sent the original separation and divorce papers. It was addressed to me in Washington. My name had been crossed out, and no longer at this address was written. It remained unopened. Alongside was a note from Irene. Phil, I had my lawyer send this to you, but it was returned. Now I understand why. I was surprised to see you on Monday. I hope you're well. Irene. I opened the envelope to find the same documents I had signed and returned, with another handwritten note attached from her. Phil, I've changed my mind about the divorce, so I never submitted these. It seems I still love you even when I try not to. If you feel the same, call me. Irene. I no longer had her phone number, but I found her office number in the SHAPE directory. This is Major Parker, she answered. So is this. I received your package. And I love you. I could almost hear her smile over the phone. There's a 5:00 flight. I can be on it if you want. What time does it land? I'll be there. That evening, when we dropped off the general, I told him about the call. I'm happy for you. Take the weekend off and Monday too if you need it. Just keep me informed. I waited for her in the lobby, unsure whether to embrace her right away. As it turned out, I didn't need to worry. When she saw me, she rushed into my arms. We stood there blocking the path for quite a while. As we lingered, a guy passing by muttered something in Italian. "What did he say?" I asked her. "He said, 'Get a room,'" she replied, and we both laughed. Hand in hand, we walked to my car and kept holding hands on the way to my place. My car had a manual transmission, so when my hand was on the gear shift, hers rested on top of mine. We didn't say much. We were just happy to be together. 10 seconds after closing the door behind us, we were in each other's arms again. After a brief pause, I asked if she wanted something to eat or drink. We settled on wine. I poured us each a glass, we toasted, and sat down on my sofa. We needed to talk, but didn't know where to begin. She broke the silence. "I was so angry with you." "I know and I understand. I'm so sorry. When I saw him and thought you were with him, I just lost it." "So did I. When he called me and said you'd been there, I tried to reach out to explain, but you didn't respond to my calls or messages. I thought you hadn't read them, which only made me angrier. I was on assignment and couldn't leave, but as soon as it was over, I flew to America to see you. The entire flight intensified my emotions. When I arrived, you weren't home, and I couldn't access your apartment. Waiting in the hallway for you made things worse. I cried on the flight to you and cried again on the flight back. I was so upset that I decided to file for divorce. I confided in my sister, who tried to calm me down to no avail." She paused for a moment, then continued. "By the time the signed papers came back, I had cooled down a bit. My sister, who is also my attorney and much wiser than me, hadn't submitted them to the court. She kept them, and after several conversations, I realized I didn't really want a divorce. I asked her to hold off until I could talk to you. She assured me she hadn't sent them in, just waiting for me to calm down. I always said she was smarter than me." Taking a sip of her wine, she went on, "I tried calling you, but my number was blocked, which upset me again because I assumed you didn't want to discuss reconciliation. I sent the papers back to you, but they were returned because you had moved and I didn't know how to reach you." She paused again, collecting her thoughts. "Then I saw you come in with the general and I was overwhelmed. Yes, reconciliation is what I wanted. I was angry and upset initially. I never wanted a divorce. When you came to Washington, I tried to call you, but you didn't answer." She smiled sadly. "I messed up our first year together, and you messed up this past year. We can't afford any more mistakes." We chuckled together. "No, we can't and we won't," she said. I paused to take a sip before asking, "Who is he? And why was he there?" "He is my cousin," she explained. "He and his wife were staying there while their apartment was being painted. When he opened the door, he mistook you for Frederick at first glance. His English isn't great, and he was nervous. He attended our wedding and recognized you from there. After he realized who you were, he tried to explain but struggled due to his English. Unfortunately, you didn't give him a chance. When he called me, he felt terrible for not being able to communicate properly with you." We sat in silence for a while. I finished my wine and went to refill our glasses. She saw what I was doing, hastily finished her own and handed me her glass. As I poured, she retrieved something from her carry-on bag, returned to the sofa, and sat down. Handing me her glass, she placed on the table what appeared to be an old, dried flower. "When I received this, I cried tears of joy," she said. "It's the flower you sent." I've always heard that consensual intimacy is the best, and that night I believed it. The weekend was amazing. I called the general on Sunday afternoon to confirm that taking Monday off was still fine. It was, and it became the perfect end to an incredible weekend. On Monday afternoon, I drove her to the airport. Working as an aide to a general officer meant long hours and little time off, but we made the most of our time together. Trips between Belgium and Italy were frequent and enjoyable. This went on for 4 months. Then one day, General Thompson called me into his office. Phil, Esther, and I are taking a 2-week break. We're going back to Cleveland to see your brother, who's not doing well. We leave on Friday. In the meantime, we want you to take some leave as well. I'm sorry to hear about her brother, sir, and I understand her wanting to visit. I'll take the leave and spend it in Belgium. You won't have to. I've spoken with Saussure and arranged for Major Irene Parker to join my staff. She wanted it to be a surprise, but I don't like surprises. She'll be here on Friday. Frankie will take us to the airport so you can stay here and wait for her. I thanked him warmly and left. The executive officer, administrative assistant, and secretary all grinned at me as I walked out. I had been residing in the BOQ where it seemed I spent most of my time. However, since only one of us could stay there, I visited the housing office to inquire about available accommodations. As the general's aide, I was eligible for on-base housing. The only option was on Colonel's Row, despite my rank being far below that. Nonetheless, they relocated me there with the assurance that no one would object because of my position. The house came furnished with government items, sufficient until Irene and I could furnish it ourselves. One Friday afternoon, with the general and his wife away, I sat idle in my office when she unexpectedly entered. I leapt up, greeted her with a kiss. "I take it you weren't expecting me," she remarked. "Who spilled the beans?" "General Thompson did, and I'm glad he did. Come on, let's go home." Her car was packed with her belongings, so she followed me to our new home. She was pleasantly surprised by our house, expecting us to be cramped in my small BOQ room for a while. "It's not the best, but it's home for however long we're here," I said. "It's lovely." The following 2 years were good ones. General Thompson was reassigned to the Pentagon and invited me to join him. After discussing it with Irene, we decided that we preferred to remain in Europe. The general understood completely and contacted the Saussure once again. Consequently, both Irene and I were reassigned back to shape. As Mel Brooks once said, "It's good to be the king." While we weren't royalty ourselves, we were close enough as we knew him. Now we're back in Belgium with a 3-year assignment ahead, which can be extended. Irene has served longer in the army than I have, so she'll retire before me. When I retire, we plan to live in America, but will frequently visit Denmark to see her family. Willie's grandmother is still alive and active, though she now uses a wheelchair. Willie, Sophie, little Philip, and his younger brother Sean have moved to Ireland. Life is good.